Hi, welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. My guest on the show today is Rebecca Firth. Rebecca is the Executive Director of the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, also known as HOT. They are a global NGO and a community of around 750,000 people making free and open source maps in the places that need them most. In this conversation, we get into the drone tasking manager HOT has built that lets local people using low-cost consumer drones capture professional quality aerial imagery of their own communities. We talk about how it works, what it took to build it, the assumptions they got wrong along the way, and what it actually looks like on the ground in places like Freetown, where the same drone imagery is now being used for everything from waste collection planning to disability access to flood mitigation, and perhaps soon thermal mapping during heat waves. If you care about mapping, drones, open data, or just the idea that local people with local tools can solve problems faster than anyone flying in from outside, you're going to enjoy this one. But before we get into it, a quick word from today's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by GeoBusiness, which is back at Excel London on the 3rd and 4th of June. Now, the good people at GeoBusiness could have sponsored any episode, but they decided to give the stage to the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team to help spread this story, and I really appreciate that. So if you have been around the geospatial world for a while, you probably already know GeoBusiness. It's a place where the geo community comes together. Whether you work in urban planning, environmental management, construction, or any field where location matters, which, let's face it, that's all of the fields, there's something there for you. So at GeoBusiness, you'll see real-world cases of geospatial technology in action, get hands-on with the latest innovations, and hear from leading industry experts working on actual business challenges. There's live demos, insightful seminars, and thousands of professionals using location intelligence in genuinely exciting ways. If you want to stay ahead or even up to date in this rapidly evolving space, you can register to GeoBusiness for free. I'll drop a link in the show notes and you can go grab your ticket. And who knows, maybe I'll see you there. So thank you very much, GeoBusiness, for sponsoring this episode. I really appreciate it. Okay, here's my conversation with Rebecca from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. Hey, Rebecca, welcome to the podcast. It's always funny saying that to people like yourself when we've just been chatting for the last 5 minutes, but welcome to Mapscaping. So you're the executive director of something called the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. Now, if somebody listening to this has never heard of that before, how would you describe that to them and what your role is there?
Hey, it's so nice to be with you today. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Team, also known as HOT, is a global NGO and community of about 750,000 people around the world who are making free and open source maps. But why do they need to do that? They need to make maps because without maps, people are left out in services. They're left out of things like disaster response. They're left out of government service delivery like water and sanitation and upgrading of the communities they live in. This is a huge, huge problem because the majority of growth that happens in the world happens in informal settlements. It happens in an unplanned way, which means it is not recorded when it happens. It's not, planned, drawn on a map, built to a certain kind of spec. It springs up, people move around, they need to make changes in the environment kind of adapts. And that has to be documented in order for services to be delivered to people that live there that would upgrade the quality of life that they're experiencing. So our mission is to make sure that missing maps and missing data are not a cause for human suffering or loss of life, and they currently are. If you're not visible in a data set, it's difficult for the people that are trying to support that location, whether that's government, whether that's international NGOs, whether that's the UN, whether that's just local community organizers. It's very, very difficult for them to know that their intervention is dealing with the right problem and to measure if it's having any effect. And so we exist to solve that problem. It's a big problem and it's one that kind of keeps evolving every time there's a disaster, every time there's a big internal displacement, every time there's migration, the map changes. And we need to make sure that we have the community of mappers and people set up to adapt the map as that happens.
And just one question, when we're talking about the map, we're talking about documentation, are we in fact talking about OpenStreetMap?
Yeah, so a lot of the data that we create is in OpenStreetMap. Think of it as anything you can see with the eye would go into OpenStreetMap. So, physical infrastructure, visible features, they're great things to put in OpenStreetMap. We also have some projects which collect data about individuals, which collect data that is kind of more sensitive, more private, and shouldn't be OpenStreetMap. And that data is stored privately and is accessible to kind of the people that need that. But for the most part, kind of anything physical would be in OpenStreetMap, and anything kind of above that would be stored privately. We have a tool called Open Aerial Map, which is a place where imagery gets stored that people can then map from. And so it's sort of a precursor in a way to OpenStreetMap, but also you can just use imagery directly for other things. It doesn't have to be mapping. We have about 9 tools that sort of work in sequence that enable you to kind of make data that could go into OpenStreetMap, but also use that data separately as well, should you wish. But yeah, mapping is obviously like a really fundamental part of quality data sets in low and middle income countries, because georeferenced data is much more usable, interoperable, helpful data than, just kind of data that doesn't have a geospatial component. So obviously the kind of OpenStreetMap grounding is critical to us because we're not a direct humanitarian provider. We're not a direct development actor. Our work is to enable those that are direct humanitarian and development actors to do that work better. And they can do that work better when all their data, they're using a kind of common base, they're using a common backbone, they're able to compare between different organizations what they're doing, they're able to add a bunch of historical or current data to that backbone and easily kind of compare, contrast it across organizations. So it sort of solves a problem that is sort of niche in a way, but very, very cross-cutting. And it's a good example of a problem where kind of if you can solve that, it's like I often think of it as it's one piece of the puzzle, right? We are working on complex, intractable problems that persist despite years of effort to fix them. And a map is not the only thing that is going to fix that. But the map, I kind of think of it as like a puzzle piece that's like a really central piece that like once you get that piece in, everything else makes sense and you can sort of see what you're trying to build in that puzzle. And the data that we produce, the data that the communities that are part of HOT produce are kind of really critical at, making kind of a situation known, making it seen, making the kind of complexities of the human experience visible. I often think in the development sector, like we've picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit already. Like we've done the $1 vaccines, we've done the kind of simple maps that help routing or help understand where populations are for vaccines. And what's coming next are really complex intersectional problems where you're dealing with compounded crises, you're dealing with things like health and conflict and climate, all kind of compounding on each other for people that themselves are also very intersectional, right? They might be parents, they might be women, they might have a disability. And actually kind of to reach that higher hanging fruit in the development sector, excellent data is needed to enable that. And communities are the only ones who have the means and the interest to collect that. There's no business model for an international company to go out and do that. But individuals themselves, if kind of equipped and resourced, can gather that information. Local people with local tools can create local knowledge that will massively transform how development and humanitarian aid work. And that's what we're hoping to create.
Well, I realized that and this was not at all, I didn't hear this as a sales pitch, but you have to know, I'm in. It sounds like a great thing to be doing and really important work. You mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a couple of different numbers. One of them was 750,000 people, I believe, volunteers, and something, I think there was 9 tools that you mentioned that work together.
Yeah.
What is your main focus? Is your main focus on coordinating these volunteers or building software or a bit of both?
I think historically, HOT has had sort of 3 main pillars. I would say community, so developing the number of mappers, developing the experience for mappers, Ideally, we want to make sure we have repeat mappers. So just kind of ticking that number up and up isn't the only goal. Making sure that it's the same people coming back is critical. So community is the first pillar. I'd say partnerships is the second pillar. Data is not impactful unless it's used. And we need to make sure that there is a really strong relationship between the people making data, people using the data. Sometimes they're the same person, but often they're different people. And impact for us, obviously, is if we can make data in one place and then crowd in multiple partners to use that, we can keep having impact without doing any work. So getting as many partners as possible, becoming more data informed, we think is only a good thing. And then the third pillar is tech. And so, really key for us is making free and open source software that continues to lower the barrier for what it means for mappers, continues to lower the barrier for people to make data and to use data. I would say that's it's part of our vision statement. It's for sure not something we've achieved on. One of our goals is that anyone, anywhere can be a mapper. And there's obvious limitations to that, right? You need to have a device to be a mapper. We're never going to be able to, lower the barrier of our tech so fully that kind of people without devices can't be mappers. But we still want to get it as low as possible. One of our biggest goals around there is making sure that, to what extent can we either make apps that need such little training that people can just pick up and use them without necessarily having to be trained? Where can we create maps from other apps people are already using? We have a very promising product right now called ChatMap, which pulls data from chat apps like WhatsApp or Signal to make maps. So the person who's mapping isn't even, they're not having to download a new tool and be trained in how to use it. They're just sending a photo on a tool they already have, and back end, you're collating that into a map. It's definitely not perfect across our tool suite because, different elements of it obviously do just have slightly more technical limitations, but, it's really important to us that we continue to push that barrier down as far as it can go, which has been an interesting challenge. And I think taken a long time, taken a lot of debate, consideration, discussion within the community. And when I first joined the community in 2014, I was a digital consultant, and I found it really, really difficult to use tools that other people were telling me were accessible. And I think having that debate around what does it mean to be accessible? What kind of stakeholder are we really looking at for our kind of core stakeholders of the future is really, really critical. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey, but really proud of the progress. And I feel confident that kind of our tool suite is getting to a place where we can kind of really honestly make that claim that our goal is for anyone, anywhere to be a mapper.
I'm hoping during this conversation we could focus in on one particular tool. I believe it's one tool. It may be a suite of tools. My understanding is that you've done something pretty awesome around a drone tasking manager. Is that correct?
Yes, very excited about it.
Could you tell me a little bit about that, and then just what it is, what it does, and then I want to understand a little bit more about the development side of this.
So the drone community, the OpenStreetMap community, the HOT community has been capturing drone imagery for many, many years. There's many kind of individuals, enthusiasts who've been capturing drone imagery in middle-income countries for a long time. And a lot of them had used our tool, Open Aerial Map, to store that imagery because it's a free place that people can store drone imagery. Initially, kind of one of the things we made Open Aerial Map for was to be able to store both drone and satellite imagery and, compare between them, be able to see sort of different imagery of the same place and also just be an open source repository for imagery. But we had this kind of tricky moment, I guess, in the OSM community where Maxar, which was formerly Digital Globe and is now Vantor, have been through a few rebrands, decided to kind of pull their imagery from the open mapping community. It used to be a kind of permanent layer available in the open mapping community, and they decided to remove that. We're lucky that we do have big imagery, we do have Esri imagery, but it became clear to us how vulnerable our ecosystem was around imagery. So this concept of, okay, what can we do to solve that? What can we do to fill that? What can we do to reduce that vulnerability came up. And the idea of the drone tasking manager was born from that. So a lot of the satellite imagery that we were working with was either not up to date or not available or not high resolution enough for the use cases that we were looking at supporting. So for example, on satellite imagery, often you can see roads and waterways and you can discern land use. But on drone imagery, you can identify things like small residential buildings or drainage, footways, electrical systems. So as kind of HUT was evolving, and I guess the ambition of the data that we wanted to create was increasing, we thought, we need to have multiple imagery options because we have a vulnerability around dependency on satellite imagery, and actually much higher quality imagery could be really, really powerful for the community. And so we decided to develop the drone TM, I guess, as a bit of a kind of play on the drone sector, which we felt was very high end, but had potential to grow at the low end. So in the countries that we're working in, which is in the past few years, we've worked in 63 low and middle income countries, there often is access to drone imagery, but that access to that drone imagery is often proprietary. It's created from large, expensive, highly regulated drones. So drones that cost between like $4,000 and $40,000. And it needs this very expensive equipment, very expensive training and certification for the pilot, and is quite loaded in terms of the security and safety concerns as well, because very large drones are something that is a lot of countries have sensitivities to because they're kind of equipment that could be used in warfare, etc. So we felt there was this huge gap in the market for like a non-weaponizable, very low-cost drone to be something that we could use to scale the availability of drone imagery for mapping. But more than that, we didn't just want to scale the imagery. We thought a way to scale that is through local people becoming drone operators. So how can a resident of an informal settlement that we want to map become a drone pilot? So the drone TM, drone tasking manager, really emphasizes that idea of local people from the community that is being mapped using low cost, lightweight, inexpensive drones to create professional quality data instead of the prior model, which is either one foreign contractor coming in or there might be, say, 1 to 2 local drone operators, but charging an international price point. How could we, enable 20, 30, 40 residents of that local community to generate imagery of the same quality and obviously leave behind that permanent capacity, skills and ownership within that community that could keep doing that over and over again? And a lot of what drone TM, a lot of what it does is it's just software which coordinates those 20, 30, 40 pilots to map an area without overlapping each other, making sure they get full coverage, making sure it's quality data, etc., etc.
Sounds amazing. Again, this sounds incredible. Could you give me an example of this, like in the field? Like, how does it work? What do I do? Do I need to download it, set it up on a server? Does everyone need an app? Are there limitations to the drones that can be used? What does the data look like when it comes out the other end? Which one of those questions do you want to tackle first?
There's a bunch of great questions. So a project creator, I guess, would be someone who wants to make drone imagery in a certain area of interest. And they can create a project in the drone TM with the parameters of that project. So they can say, like, this is the area, this is the resolution I want, this is how much overlap I want, etc. And they can make that project. The drone TM will then split that into lots of small individual tasks. And those tasks, they're about like 500 meters squared. So think of just like a grid. Every square in the grid is 500 meters squared. Then the drone operator can log in with their laptop or their phone and select one of those tasks. And they'll download that. They'll upload it to the drone remote control unit. And then they just press go. And the drone will carry out the flight plan automatically. And the drone operator would rarely have to do anything other than press go. So if something goes wrong, like, they sort of start and finish from the same point. So let's say like a car comes and drives over the point that it was meant to finish at during the flight, you might have to do a manual landing. But other than that, the operator doesn't need to touch flight control. So what we often talk about this as being like the flip phone drone. It's a really basic, easy way to use drones. So a really organized and motivated drone operator could probably do about 12 of those flights in a day. They last like 15, 20 minutes each. In that, they'd be covering about 3 kilometers squared with this 5 centimeter resolution. And then they'll get that imagery. And then from the drone, they upload those photos to the drone TM, which will then process the imagery. So you've had that first thing where someone's created a project, that second thing where a drone operator has come in, selected a task, pressed go, had their drone fly, and then they need to get those photos from the drone to the drone TM. So they'll upload them and they're processed using the Open Drone Map software suite. So opendronemap.org are an amazing partner for us. They've created like a core technological component for what communities need to make great imagery. And it produces this orthophoto mosaic of the original images from the drone across the whole area. And also a kind of 3D mesh, which is pretty similar to what you'd see in like a 3D video game, but enables a bunch of extra exciting kind of map opportunities. So from the operator's point of view, they don't need masses of prior training or knowledge. They just need kind of basic operation of a consumer drone. The drones that we're currently using cost about $1,000, but we're looking to integrate kind of many more models. And our goal is that this will be a kind of BYO option. People can bring their own drone. They don't have to use any kind of particular equipment or prior thing. We're also innovating ourselves like a community drone, an actual piece of hardware that would be creating kind of community mapping drone. We've experimented in the past with build your own drone. We have an IKEA manual that sort of says, find a piece of polystyrene about this big and find some bamboo or sticks about this big. And we can send the propellers around the world to get drones built, which is amazing because obviously if that drone crashes, it's quite easy to rebuild. And, our goal in the long run is that kind of people could be using any model, even right down to like a homemade drone, to capture professional quality drone imagery on this platform with very, very minimal training.
Just one question. Well, I've got a bunch of questions, but let's start with this one. So the idea of whoever it is, that the tasking manager may be creating like this project and putting in those parameters. You mentioned something like 5 centimeters resolution, just as an example, maybe. But my question is then, to get that 5 centimeter resolution, do you need to know everything there is to know about that drone, or you're just making some assumptions and saying, hey, here's a flight plan. If you fly at this height, we'll end up with that resolution. Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, so at the moment, we use the DJI Mini 4 Pro, and
okay, right.
That is it's a consumer model available for about $1,000 that we are using, but we're integrating 4 new models this year in the next sort of 8-9 months. And then from there, our next goal is to make this interoperable with any drone at all. This is like an innovation in its sort of journey. Our first goal was making it work with one widely available cheap drone. And we'll be looking to build in more and more over this year and hopefully getting to, that BYO drone concept next year.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you're starting with that one model, okay, so you know the specifications of it. Okay, yes, appreciate the clarification. Thank you. What happens to the output of this, the imagery, the mosaic that's created? Where does that live?
So the drone imagery that we collect lives in Open Aerial Map. It's then free and accessible for anybody to use. You can go into Open Aerial Map yourself and kind of either view the imagery or download it or make projects in OpenStreetMap with it. But there are also a number of other tools that you can use to store the 3D element of this. And I think there's a variety of different options that will enable you to kind of fly the imagery in a different way. And so one of them is 3D Street View, which is quite fun. You can put the imagery in there and then you can almost fly around it yourself to see how the environment looks, which is something that especially our stakeholders in local government have really enjoyed because they are obviously deliberately trying to design something to support that environment. And if they can kind of go in and fly around and see what it looks like, even just that basic use case is really helpful to them to really understand, like, if I'm trying to design something for this environment, what does it look like? Well, I can just load it up and have a look right now. But there's a variety of different tools that you can use to do that piece.
That is really cool that you've got those other bits in place already. So Open Aerial Map where you can just, okay, great, export it out there, drop the mosaic in there so people can see it, use it, and make use of it in the future as well. Really, really smart. This might be a little bit of a side quest here, but have you heard of a project, a company called Mapillary?
Yes, yeah.
Did they accept drone imagery?
I don't know the answer to that question.
That would be really interesting if they did.
I think they do street view imagery. And I think there's probably some interesting intersection between drone imagery, which captures like the aerial image plus an angled image, which can show you, it's not street view, but it can show you kind of the sides of buildings and things like shop names, etc., which are are one of the use cases for street view imagery. I imagine there's probably a bit of intersection and overlap there, but I don't know about kind of how Mapillary has evolved in the last year or two. Back when I was using it, it was, put a camera on your dashboard and drive around.
Yeah.
But may well have evolved since then.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate there was a bit of a side quest, but I thought it might be interesting to know that. I'm sure there is some overlap there. When you're designing this, so you talked about the flip phone drone, which is really hard to say actually, idea, right? So the idea is that anyone can do this. They just need a phone and a cheap drone, like maybe even a build your own drone at some stage. But what were some of the challenges in building that? Because what you're doing is a very complex task at the end of the day. And especially once you start integrating different kinds of drones, different kinds of resolutions, different ways of planning a flight, maybe different ways of communicating, different ways of downloading, perhaps even different file formats. What are some of your sort of guiding principles when you got to make this flip phone drone concept?
I guess the first thing to highlight is the building of this product has been done based on decades of experience of working with local people and to create local technology. So technology that functions at the local level. Our co-developer for the drone tasking manager, NAXA, which is a Nepalese organization, were just absolutely fantastic partners in this because they just have a deep understanding of the challenges and constraints of a local kind of community sort of setup in a way that if we contracted with a global organization, they might not have had that knowledge because it wasn't something that they experienced. So I think we kind of were extremely lucky to have NAXA as a partner in this because they understood the needs in a way that engineers from wealthy countries rarely can. I think the kind of key thing for us, there have been obviously a lot of challenges in trying to do something like this, right? Like trying to bring a really, really high-end technology to the lowest resource settings on Earth. And I think we definitely made some assumptions from some of the ways that our technology had worked before that then didn't play out in this context.
What were some of those assumptions?
One really clear one is that, we built this very elaborate credential system that enabled only somebody who'd locked a task to be able to access a flight plan. And this was based, I think, on an assumption from one of our flagship tools, the Tasking Manager, which enables remote mappers to come together and map an area without overlapping. And all those individuals are working at their own laptops around the world. So we sort of applied that same approach of, okay, if you've locked a task, it's yours and no one else can map it, to the drone task manager, saying, I've locked this task, now I'm going to fly it and no one else can. And what we missed there was there's a huge difference between you and me sitting at our laptops mapping a task and you and me in a city running around on the ground trying to fly drones. And people were very, very enthusiastically coordinating in the field. They were swapping tasks. They were shifting area of focus because of rain or traffic or road conditions. And so locking a task didn't mean that you necessarily definitely wanted to do that next. You might encounter some sort of barrier on your way to that task and decide to do something else. And so we just made this assumption from the way that our virtual mapping tool worked to real life. And, that was annoying. We spent a lot of time and money building that credential system and it didn't work. But in the end, we mostly scrapped it. You can still mark a task as locked, but that doesn't stop someone else from accessing it, which means that I could WhatsApp you and say hey, I was going to go to this one. I can see you're already there. Why don't you do it instead? Without this kind of technological blocker to that. So that was a good example of something that we made a mistake on. Perhaps another thing is charging. Prior to our pilots for this, we thought that charging would be a really significant issue because the drone batteries need to be recharged relatively frequently. And that's kind of the case, obviously, when you're using a consumer grade drone rather than a professional drone. And so we thought that charging was going to be a big challenge. And we had kind of come up with all these plans around charging from car batteries and alternates that were going to de-risk this. And then actually found that local people had no issue getting their drone batteries charged locally. They could just stop for lunch and ask to charge their battery and easily find pathways through that. So it was a good example of something that we kind of thought, okay, if we're looking at a pro drone versus a consumer drone, what are the differences? Okay, battery life's the difference. How are we going to structure to solve that problem ourselves? And then realize that actually local people don't need us to solve that problem for them. They are able to access that. And actually, that's going to be way cheaper and easier to, give everybody an extra dollar to pay for charging than to ourselves try to solve that problem. So there was a bunch of stuff like that where I think we had kind of, made some assumptions, I guess, on how this was going to work out, and then were proved wrong. And, fortunately, I guess in both cases have resulted in either less work on our side or a more flexible system, both of which are probably good things and are good examples of, I guess, like initial hypotheses that you go into your first field test with and then figure out actually you didn't need to worry about that and you do need to worry about a bunch of other things instead.
Yeah, it's the magic of field testing, hey? People listening to this will go, oh, great, sounds amazing. What about accuracy? This is a geospatial podcast. There'll be someone out there like, we need to be precise. We need to be survey grade. Like, obviously, it's accurate. You're creating this mosaic. Do you have any sort of statistics you can give us about accuracy? We mentioned like the 5 centimeter resolution. That's one thing. Is it like georeferenced accurately, the entire mosaic, or is it relative to each image? So you get a massive image, but it's not, georeferenced accurately on the ground.
Yeah. I think there are probably two pieces to this question. So the first one is for me around like the coordination. How do you have belief that if you coordinate all of those different operators flying different drones over the same area, that you're going to end up with one seamless mosaic as an output? So that is the kind of heart of the tasking manager part of the drone TM. So it makes these flight plans that overlap along the edges so that the flight executed by each drone functions as though it was one portion of a much larger continuous flight. And the overlap helps ensure that any like inaccuracies or issues with the georeferencing from one drone or one flight to another are corrected by aligning the overlapping areas. And that means that you have this kind of seamless final product that merges all those tasks in the overall project area. But there was another part to your question about the georeferencing. So consumer drones don't have high precision GPS receivers the same way that a professional drone would. So obviously the georeferencing is not as good as a professional mapping drone. However, so a professional mapping drone might achieve like 5 centimeter accuracy if all goes well, and a consumer drone would get like 2 to 3 meters, depending on. So a bit better than your phone. Your phone isn't perfectly accurate, but not as good as a survey grade GPS. So we mitigate that with ground control points. So if one of the team members uses like a ground-based GNS device, then like an RG Simple, then they can make 5 centimeter precise points on multiple features visible in the imagery. And then the Open Drone Map processes that so that your kind of result, your georeferencing, is every bit as good as what had come from a professional drone. But for sure, it adds a bit of time and complexity, but it is way cheaper still and faster with like a big team than using a single professional drone. But the interesting thing for us around that question is, I think in our experience, like for the use cases and the partners we serve, which is local government, local organizations like the World Bank in low and middle income countries, they don't actually need or want high absolute positional accuracy. They need high relative accuracy. So as long as the imagery shows the right things at the right distance from each other, then the exact like placement of that on a geodetic model of the Earth isn't critical. Most people are already accustomed to using tools which don't have that. So most people are already accustomed to using Google satellite imagery, which, for example, has like a really substantial some positional inaccuracies, complex distortion as well. What we find our users need often is a view to work from and or a view to detect change from. So they're interested in seeing what is in this imagery that is different from some previous imagery we might have from 6 years ago when someone came and did a drone project here. And so often the main thing we need to align from is actually not the ground control points we have, it's to whatever they were working with before. And so it's good to have, I think, the flexibility in the options because our goal is usable data. It's not saying here's a perfect map of the Earth to the 5 centimeters, that would make if you were mapping the whole Earth would be helpful. We're talking to a local council person in Freetown who's looking to need some drone imagery so they can plan and upgrade to an informal settlement. They don't need to know that to 5 centimeters. They need to know that in relation to the previous image they're working from, which was 7 years ago, which has a third of the buildings. And so for us, it's about like making something that's flexible enough that it can be perfect if you want it to. You can use those ground control points to make it perfect. And also it can just fit with what you need, because our goal is data that solves problems. And so what is the easiest way to do that for you as an individual might vary.
But it sounds like a question. I don't mean to harp on about this, but for me, it sounds like a question of inputs as well. If I had better inputs, I would get a better output. Is that correct? So, and what I'm getting at here is I'm thinking about the people that live in maybe not a developing country that think, wow, this is pretty cool. I've got like a hobby project down the road I'd really like to use this piece of software for. And my guess is that if we had better inputs, if I did have a more expensive drone or did the surveying or more accurate data in whatever form that might take, better inputs into the system would also give me a better output.
I would say it's more the system can adjust to the input that you have. And so if you have an input that has that, this tool can work with expensive professional drones. It's just that there are already other software which coordinate them. And so that isn't like a market segment we're targeting. But you for sure could use Drone TM for that. And then great, you'd have that already. Our goal with Drone TM is that can adjust for if you don't have that to give you an output of the same quality. And so kind of that's the approach that we've built. It's really our goal is really trying to make sure that you can create professional consumer grade imagery from low cost drones and pilots that don't have a huge amount of prior experience or training.
One of the challenges I guess you face in working in the environments that you work in must be connectivity. Will this also work offline?
Yeah, you are correct. The internet is for sure a challenge. So it doesn't work offline perfectly. It does if somebody has downloaded all of their flight plans prior to setting out for the day. So if you kind of know, okay, today I'm going to do these 10 flights, I'm going to download them all before I go, then you don't need internet during the day. But if you needed to change something during the day, it would be problematic. So I don't know, let's say you needed to modify a flight plan or you wanted to change one, that would be like something you would need to kind of go and access internet to do. But we are kind of currently implementing more offline features. Our goal is to get this as offline as possible and to remove any dependency on a laptop. So you could do it just with an Android phone and your consumer drone and without internet during the daytime. So right now, one of the things we're kind of working on is the ability to regenerate a flight plan, including terrain, because one amazing thing the Drone TM does is make sure that the drone remains at like a consistent altitude above ground level. And like building the ability to do that on a phone without a network connection is one of our kind of current priorities. I think it will always be hard to deal with that task locking thing offline. There's no obvious way to, if I lock a task offline, there's no obvious or easy way to kind of show that in the kind of console of somebody else. So probably one of the biggest risks is you just have like a small duplication of effort where it just happened that a couple of people both offline, both locked a new task that they hadn't previously locked prior to going out for the day. I don't think that's kind of a massive risk in comparison to the benefit of the offline access. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. Like you trade off a couple of duplicated efforts for the efficiency of everybody in that who's collecting drone imagery in an area to be able to access it offline if they needed to.
Wow, man, if you guys figure that out, that'll be pretty impressive. Who pays for this? Like my guess is it costs money to run these servers. You know, if you've got OpenDroneMap running on a server somewhere, in theory, you could be processing an incredible amount of imagery. And I guess different projects around the world running, at the same time. Who pays for this?
Yeah, for sure. Improving the efficiency of the processing and the upload is one of our current priorities, and OpenDroneMap are doing an amazing job working on that to make it cheaper and quicker. One of the critical things they're building right now is the ability to, if it kind of pauses for some reason during the upload, to just pick up right back up at that same moment, which would reduce cost and time and things like that. So the World Bank funded the initial creation of the drone TM software, partly I think because it aligned with their values. The World Bank are paying often for sort of moment in time drone imagery captures across the world. Like every few years, they'll pay for kind of drone imagery capture for most African cities, major cities. And they would much rather be procuring that imagery from local people because, they're also experiencing the challenges of bringing kind of consulting drone operators into areas where they need data, whether that's cost or whether that's, the drone complexity of importing drones into different countries. And also because I think they believe very strongly in like directing the economic benefit of their activity to the local population. So they funded the first kind of proof of concept for this tool, which was it's a complicated tool. So the first proof of concept there was a lot in that, and that was incredible. Right now, we're sustaining it with some philanthropic funds that we have, which are kind of targeted at this sort of innovation. How do we make this a more scalable, more usable tool by, taking it more offline, removing the need for a laptop, bringing in different models of drones, which are all kind of, I guess, really important things to the scalability of this as a solution. And that's being funded philanthropically. In the long run, this is something that we believe we and others will be able to generate income from. So we know that drone imagery is something that has a very high price on it currently. Drone imagery is kind of an expensive luxury product, I guess. And one of our goals is building out a marketplace of where communities who are sort of the vendors in this marketplace, trained and accredited in our approach, can provide local data and drone services to the clients, in this case, governments, NGOs, local partners, potentially local businesses as well. There are many socially aligned local businesses that I think kind of the communities we work with would love to provide more business to. And our intention is that we'll kind of build a marketplace that will enable that to fly. So enable communities who are trained in gathering drone imagery to sort of market their services to local organizations who could pay for that, which is why, we believe our approach is so important, that we aren't just flying in somebody from outside that community to fly it and then go home, even if their home is in the same country. We're enabling somebody who is within that community, who is permanently equipped with the skills and experience to fly a drone, to keep doing that. And we've seen that again and again. One of the kind of flagship places we innovated this concept was in Freetown in Sierra Leone. Freetown has a very innovative local government that really makes kind of projects like this a complete delight to do. We were working with Slum Dwellers International, a local organization, plus the Freetown City Council and the local OpenStreetMap communities. We trained 14 pilots, which were a mix of local residents and local government. So that was really interesting, having local government, local residents gathering the data together. They flew drone imagery, and that imagery has now been used for 7 different use cases by Freetown City Council. So across 7 different departments, it's been used for figuring out the width of roads in slums so that you can understand where you can pass like a waste removal truck. So there was not waste removal services, and the government wanted to build those, but needed to know where can my rubbish trucks actually pass? And if it can't pass down here, what's the other solution? Do I need to designate like a drop-off point, or do I need to have some other kind of form of collection? It's been used for improving disability access in slums. It's been used for flood mitigation. The next big thing we're doing is building in a thermal component to the drone mapping so that they can understand the kind of heat sensitivity at the building level. And critically, our hope is build the capacity to be able to fly these drones during a heat wave. So this is a critical example of a use case where local people using local tools is critical. You cannot fly in an international person during an extreme heat event to say what is happening on the ground. There are known issues with the current ways people gather extreme heat, like the sensors, etc., that people use to do that are not reflective of true indoor temperatures. So this is a really powerful technology to be able to deploy on the day, saying, okay, we know we're going to have an extreme heat event tomorrow. Let's get ourselves set up to actually fly and capture that imagery during the event itself. Is an amazing use case of kind of the potential of this idea and the kind of potential of that local community being trained, equipped and ready to respond to that we're really, really excited for. And we actually just saw the first thermal imagery coming out of Freetown last week. And it was amazing to see the variation of what is it look building to building when you have like a different roof type, and what is the impact of trees on shading roadside businesses and things like that. It was really incredible to see. So really excited for the direction that could go in, and how, it's not just drone imagery, it's also kind of other things like this thermal imagery that can really increase the kind of power and potential of the drone tasking manager even further.
I can really see the value of that compounding as well, because you just said like, oh, look at that there's a hotspot here, and then being able to remove that layer and look at the high resolution RGB imagery underneath and go, okay, right, it's made out of that. That makes a lot of sense. And then being able to do some fancy machine learning on top of that and saying, show me all the rooftops that look like that are made of tin, for example, and what is the heat?
Yeah. And actually, one of the bits of that project I'm the most excited for is it's funded by like a really innovative funder, the Howden Foundation. They really want to enable local action. So they allowed a small section of the grant to be available for local people to make the adaptation themselves. So critically, most climate adaptation around the world is, a government is mandated to make a climate action plan, and they make their climate action plan, and then they implement their climate action plan. And what's completely missing is that local people can make a lot of these adaptations themselves very low cost. Like, how much would it cost to paint a tin roof white if someone could do it themselves, rather than wait for the government to set up a project to do it for the whole city? If you knew there was an extreme heat event next week and you can have a few dollars for some white paint, you're going to paint your roof white. And so one of the most amazing things we have in that grant, I think, is the ability to connect the technology. Yes, the drone task manager is cool. Yes, we want to make sure it can do thermal imagery. Yes, we want to make sure that local people are equipped to gather that the same day. And also, how can we make a couple of dollars available for residents who are aware of that project, participating in that project, given knowledge by that project, to self-lead an adaptation, which is something I'm super excited to see the impact of, see what adaptations people do, see how long it takes. My guess is it's going to be a lot quicker than waiting for the government to do a citywide project when there are 52 informal settlements that house 450,000 people. My guess is it's going to be a lot quicker for you to just go out and do it yourself. But it'll be really interesting to see, and we're excited that we kind of have funders that enable us to design such elegant projects that bring together so many different kind of components. And it will be an amazing experiment to see the kind of power of just equipping people with knowledge and small resources to see what happens when they kind of can self-lead those adaptations.
Now, you've done that project in Freetown, which, it's been used for these 7-8 different things, and I'm sure they're going to build on top of that. But I think that building on top of it is going to be really interesting. What are they going to do in the years coming up? Like, are they going to take imagery, as the season change? I don't know if it changes very much there, but if it does, like, are they going to update that on a quarterly basis maybe? What is that going to mean? Looking back at that archive over the next, 5 years or something, that is going to be fascinating, I think. Plus, adding on those projects that you're talking about, like, what impact are we actually having when we start compounding this kind of stuff? That's going to be really interesting. So, people will have been listening to this and just like me go, yes, we're in. Woo! This is amazing. For those kind of people, like, what do? How can they become an operator, a developer, a funder, someone who thinks this matters and wants to help? What are the pathways into this?
It's an amazing question. So I think the Drone TM is a tool that, that first proof of concept is out there. This has been field tested in about 10 different locations, and we're ready for partners, ready to stretch who it can serve, what it can do. So what we're looking for is people to tell us what you need, and we'll tell you if Drone TM can or will support it. We're looking for people with aerial imagery needs. So if you want to be like a customer of the imagery, partner with us and a local community. We'll help the local community to get going and create data for you and be available to keep doing that. And if you want to fly drones yourself, you can go to the website, you can have a go, you can get in touch with us. We have a number of webinars online and training materials out there for it. If you are a local drone operator, or you are working with a local drone operator, then get in touch and partner with us, because we really want to build the relationships, the kind of business that we can support those local drone operators with. And so I guess it's a very stage of like an open door right now, I would say, with the Drone TM, where I think the concept is great, it's working, and there's some really excited and innovative people behind it who want to build it further.
Well, I guess from my side, I just want to say thanks. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's amazing what you're doing, and I appreciate the work that you do. So thanks very much for showing up and teaching us a little bit about it today. Cheers.
Thanks for giving us the time. Appreciate it.